Hello everyone, this is your instructor Frank Demos. As promised, making a video presentation for Chapter 1. I like to add a personal touch to the presentations in this online course and bring in a little bit of what we typically do in a traditional face-to-face section. So this is not a substitute for reading the chapter, but just to kind of add some extra points and ideas and hopefully clarify some things with what you'll see when you look through Chapter 1. So the first chapter on two-dimensional art, or drawing, painting, printmaking, is basically in the first half dealing with different medium that you can use to create drawings and paintings and visual art. And they talk about dry medium, chalk, charcoal, and if you want, you can look at some of these videos here that kind of get at the process and technique. Julian Beaver is a really interesting chalk artist. If you thought chalk art maybe was not that fascinating, there's some incredible and amazing things you can do with chalk art. And what he tends to do is use real human beings pose with the chalk art he creates, and then uses kind of unique and special photographic camera angles to enhance the illusions he's creating, with his chalk art here. So pretty amazing stuff just in regards to chalk art. And again, I'm not going to go through every little technique. That's for you to do on your own. But you also have, along with dry medium like chalk and charcoal, you have things like oil that can be used to blend pigments with, that they talk about. And if you think about this, if you go all the way back to prehistoric art, cave paintings and things like this, what did they use to create these artworks? Well, if you wanted pigments, you couldn't go, of course, to Home Depot or Hobby Lobby. You'd have to find these pigments naturally in the earth. So for reds, you would use flowers or berries, or often blood was used for red. For greens, you would have to find plants and leaves, etc. And you would need to blend that typically with a thicker, more oily substance. And what we're told by the historians is that often these cave paintings would blend pigment naturally found in the earth with saliva, which is a thicker, oily substance. So when they talk about oil painting or wet techniques starting on page 42, egg yolk, also known as tempera, is a common typical substance that pigment would often be blended with throughout the centuries. Of course, if you want to look at blending water with pigment, watercolor is an interesting medium. You can see a little demo here. Also, too, in basic printmaking, when you engrave something onto a surface and then set that in ink or pigment, and you're able to create copies. That's also a technology that they detail on page 44. And a really interesting video, if you're curious about this technique, is this one here on Japanese woodblock printmaking. It shows you that tradition in Asia and in Japan in particular, and how it's used. So just some extra supplementary videos, as you can see here on the YouTube clip, that kind of bring you more direct live engagement with the actual process. So I want to really focus on the second half of the chapter, especially starting on page 51, where they start talking about composition, when they talk about lines. So let's look at their definition of what a line is. I think most of us intuitively know what a line is. They give you the definition. They give you three of them basically, and we'll go through all of them. So line is a linear form in which length dominates over width. So I think intuitively we all know what a line is. But also it's a color edge. So where one color runs out and another color begins. That's another pretty basic intuitive understanding of line. But I want to focus more attention and time on their third definitional aspect, which is line is also understood to be an implication of continued direction. So they give you the example of Starry Night, where you have in the upper left here an implied line by the sequence of stars in the upper left corner. And if you connect the dots, you can see this line develop. Yes, it is kind of curved. It's not a direct sharp straight line, you know, that you have in the diagonal here, like in the screen, but you can have implied lines. And I think the most important type of implied line is eye lines. Lines of eyesight a lot of times will direct the viewer's focus towards a focal point, guiding you where to focus on, where to gaze on. So in this painting, in a way, you do have a direct line formed by the bayonets or the guns here, but the soldiers here, even though we can't see their faces, we know their eye lines are focused on this group of people and especially this individual here. So there are, you know, clever techniques like this to really pay attention to as far as implied lines, which are commonly used in visual art. So a line doesn't always have to be a very straight, obvious, you know, type of a line. It can be implied also. And they give you another great example of that with the geometric drawing on page 54, you know, which is figure 1.24. So in addition to lines, they also talk about form on page 54. And what I've done is I've pulled up word paint. And what that does is it basically allows you to you know, create artworks here. So you can kind of, you know, make little abstract or whatever drawings here. We'll actually see this program a little bit later in an extra credit activity on one of the last discussions. But for our purposes now, it also allows you to make basic shapes, polygons, octagons. You can make, you know, the shapes of arrows. You can make circles. Sorry, let's get a circle in there. And again, this is what they teach you in drawing, you know, how to make basic geometric shapes. They'll also teach you how to shade them to create a three-dimensional effect. Then you usually progress to things like drawing the human body, the human face, you know, landscapes, mountains, things like that. But obviously, along with lines, you have basic shape making is one of the basic building blocks or languages of visual art that's emphasized. And I want to get to the next important idea, which is color. And they give you the color wheel on page 55. And let me just see if I can get that better in the screen here. So they give you the color wheel on page 55. And of course, the primary colors are yellow, blue, and red. And that's because all other colors can be created with these three primary colors. So for example, an orange can be created by blending a yellow and a red. A purple is created by blending a blue and a red. Green is created by blending a yellow and a blue. And again, you can create other subtle shades by the balance of how much you use of one color versus another. So in other words, if you wanted to blend a yellow and a blue, but were heavier on the blue, you'd wind up more here. Or obviously you could create a blue-green by blending a green and a blue. So the other term that they introduce you to are warm hues and cool hues, or warm colors and cool colors. And I like to connect the cycle of the day to help people remember this term, or, you know, reinforce this terminology that they use. When is it warm out? Well, when the sun is out. So warm colors are associated with more bright, vibrant colors, orange, yellow, right? When the sun is out, where it's warm out during the day. So cool hues are when it's nighttime, right? When is it cool out? Well, in the night, in the evening, when the sun goes down. So you have the cool hues associated with blues, purples, and so on. The other point I want to add to color is that it's said that according to the laws of optics, the way we see, the most dramatic, striking contrast is created by contrasting two colors exactly opposite each other on the color wheel. So if you want to make the most dramatic or striking contrast, contrast a blue and an orange. That'll create the most striking visual phenomenon. And in fact, Impressionism uses this to perfection. And as we'll see here, the famous painting Impression Sunrise by Monet uses exactly this technique. You see you see the orange sun with its reflection effect on the water, contrasted with the blue. That is a striking contrast of two colors exactly opposite on the color wheel. And it's no accident that Impressionism uses this technique. This style was developed and came around at the time when photography first came out, which was only black and white. So this inspired painters to do things in the painting medium and exploit things in the painting medium that photography could not do, which would be to exaggerate and distort color for emotional expressive effect. And that is a typical characteristic of a lot of modern art. So just a couple extra pieces of information on that. The last idea that they get into in chapter 1 is something called perspective, and I want to spend some time going through the PowerPoint that's available here. So Western perspective is basically understood to be creating a drawing or creating a painting that looks as accurate and as three-dimensionally precise as you can possibly make it. Has incredible realism. The ideal is to make a painting or drawing look like a photograph, even though they didn't know what a photograph was in the 14, 15, 1600s. So this is also, this has a bunch of different names that are associated with it. Western perspective, because it's the dominant style of perspective in Western art, very common in classical art, art of the Renaissance, etc. here. And it's also sometimes known as linear perspective, which implies a straight line. And really to explain this, what it is that artists began to understand how the eye sees and organize drawings around those concepts. So for example, we know railroad tracks are parallel in reality, but to the eye it looks like those railroad tracks converge at a central vanishing point on a distant horizon line. So drawings began to be organized around a horizon line, and if you wanted figures to appear larger and in the foreground, you would just make them in larger proportion. If you wanted them to appear further away and distant in the background, you'd make them in smaller proportion. But typically you would organize your drawings around a horizon line, and with a vanishing point as well often. And this is why in a lot of Renaissance paintings that use this perspective or quote-unquote classical style, a lot of times your focal point is typically going to be in the center of the painting. So for example, in the famous Last Supper, you have the horizon line right here in the distant background. And it's no accident that Christ's eyes are placed exactly level on the horizon line. So the sun, S-O-N, his eyes are exactly where the sun, S-U-N, rises. Same thing here. You see this technique in a lot of Renaissance work where, drawings are organized around a horizon line, etc. Now, that's certainly not the only thing you can do, and you can look through this and see in Asian art, they're not so concerned about that. You're looking from the stream, from up above. You're looking at the trees on a level plane. It's no big deal in Asian art to kind of blend perspectives like this. The book also talks about atmospheric perspective, which is a method of creating the illusion of depth or recession in a painting or drawing by modulating color to stimulate changes affected by the atmosphere on the colors of things seen at a distance. So misty kind of variations of color as you go deeper in the background are also used to create depth of space, etc. They give you several examples, very common in Asian art, as well there. The most fun kind of variation or different type of example of perspective is shifting perspective, where the artist is deliberately toying with you, inviting you to enter the painting on many levels and see it from many layers of perspective. So fun things are little eye teasers like this. What do you see? Do you see an old woman? Do you see a young woman? The young woman is seen kind of from the back rear profile, where here's her cheekbone or jawbone. Her nose is right here, her eyelash here. The old woman is pure profile with a kind of a big chin here, mouth here, kind of a larger nose here, wearing a headscarf. Other ones are simpler, right? The rabbit here, rabbit's mouth is here, the duck. The most spectacular use of shifting perspective is cubism, where different viewpoints are blended simultaneously in one still shot. That's an interesting way of describing cubism. So I hope everyone is having fun with this unit, and we'll see you in the future. Thank you.